Good morning, everyone. Firstly, it's a real honor to be here. This is my first dialogues. Yesterday was really inspirational. I just want to thank everyone for how generous they were in sharing all of their stories. It's not often that you come to an event with such a high design quotient, so thank you so much for having me here. Today, I have the privilege of talking about something that I'm really passionate about, something that has enriched our practice by giving us countless fascinating stories and perspectives. In fact, this presentation could be alternately titled as Designing for the Stories of Everyday People. Whenever we've kind of looked at space, there's four levels that we're really looking for the space to perform on. So one is to enable function. Second is within that function, you would want the people occupying that space to do a bunch of behaviors. You'd want them to go through a series of emotions that we call experience. And then we're also looking for the space to enable the aspiration of the people within that space. So really at all four levels. I think what has been abundantly clear in this room so far is that there are a lot of these tenets that have been kind of covered, especially around aspiration and experience. But I think I wanted to focus a little bit on the action or the behavior piece. How do we really bring in an intentionality into our spaces based on just an understanding of how people would like to behave within a space? The early opportunity for this came, ironically, on a project that we were not the designers on. As change management partners for the client, we had this conundrum that we were facing where there were all of these spaces that were introduced into their workplace, but they just weren't being utilized. They looked great, but they just weren't being used. So we started to talk to the people, ask them, do you know about these spaces? Do you know why they're being used, not being used? They said they knew about them, but they weren't quite sure why they're not being used. When we looked at the spaces themselves, we understood that people had instinctively picked up on something. If you look at these four images, there are two quiet spaces in here and two collaborative spaces in here. Can you tell which is which? The problem that we found out was that you had quiet spaces with collaborative furniture, convergent furniture that was allowing people to need to interact with each other. Collaborative spaces with divergent or co-locational spaces where people were facing away from each other. So it looked fine, but it wasn't really functional. So as an experiment, what we did was on one Saturday morning, we picked up a couple of people and we took one of those spaces and rearranged the furniture based on what we think would work. We didn't tell anyone, and we just watched on a Monday morning as people came in. Utilization went up to 40%. Like, people instinctively pick up on how to use spaces. And so if we just listen to and watch how it is that they work and what it is that they do, we're able to create an intentionality within space is what we started to find. So how do we do that today? So we do that through a process that we call the strategy process, where essentially what we're doing is crowdsourcing the stories that we want the space to enable play out. So our conversations have gone from what do you want to what do you do and how do you do it. It's been about listening, and what will follow now are essentially three stories of three lobbies and ground planes, and how the stories at different scales of thinking have really enriched the kind of programming we've been able to do within the space. So the first is really for a company that we were doing a headquarters for in Hyderabad, large-scale headquarters, and our canvas essentially was a typical office building. You had the artificial reception right at the entry, you had the basement parking, you had these ground plane amenities that were typically kind of given. But then what we kind of realized as we went through this was what we call a GCC, right? It was more employee focused. There weren't going to be many visitors here. There was a really large reception, and the employee story was that when they would come in, they're coming in from a long commute. They come in, they would like a place for reprieve. They would like to drop their kids off at a creche. If they have young children, they'd like to maybe catch up with people, have a bit of a breakfast, and then go up to their floor. Whereas the journey in the building was you came into the basement, you got into the lift lobby, and you went up to the floor, right? So understanding that aspect, that people's lives in offices or employees' lives in offices are really far richer than we sometimes give them credit for, we started to come up with a bunch of ideas that we worked with the base builder on to really modify the existing building. So the first thing that we did was we said, okay, let's have a proper drop-off for where people are coming by, say, buses that are provided by the employees or by the company. Let's have them immediately transfer up to a podium plane as opposed to walking through a basement to their lift lobbies. Let's try to program amenities on that basement, on that podium level. So when you come in, there's F&B options, there's a creche, there's some level of dry cleaning, there's a restaurant like this, all of these things that they can kind of do. There's a big community moment that they're entering through and then going up. Right, so just that simple kind of a rearrangement really upped their experience quotient and really helped them lead fuller lives on campus. The other part was, of course, when we were talking to them, events and and community building is a huge part of their culture. So that front end space that was originally the reception, we kind of gave back to where they have their town halls, where they have their events, where they have their. So it became this kind of cultural magnet in the center of the entire campus, and really became a point of vibrancy within that entire building. So it became really a culture magnet within that space. The second, now kind of going out from the employee's lens, is to start to understand who are some of the other people who come visit campuses like this. So in the case of this technology client who really required that project to be done on a budget, we had to look at, they wanted this to be the primary talent attraction space. So new hires or prospective hires were essentially going to come here for interviews. And again, typical interview stories, what you'll hear in campuses is, I was waiting in a waiting chair, I went to into an interview room, and then I had to go out. I had to go through really rigorous security processes. Like, it's a very hassled process. So what we understood from this client, or as we were kind of talking to them, was, we wanted a space where, as someone who's coming to interview comes in, understand what the company is about, understands their culture, sees a level of the culture in action by having employees there engaging with each other, be able to be productive because they're still gainfully employed when they come for interviews, be able to work there if they so need, and if they have multiple rounds of interviews, have access to F&B. Like, all of these various aspects of how people would like to function within that space became really critical in trying to understand how we program. So that's exactly what we did. So we kind of introduced F&B within the space. We kind of provided settings where people could sit and work as opposed to having a waiting lounge. The talent center was at the back, but there were also training rooms on the other side, so employees kind of came down. This also was the town hall space. There was a lot of digital content that was really kind of talking about the brand and the values as well. Like, it became an experience. It became, again, a hub in the center for prospective hires who were really coming in to understand what it is that the company values. So this was really for the second level, which was the visitor. And the third story, which is really about how do we cater to community. This was a cautionary tale of what happens when we sometimes don't get it right. When we were brought in for this project, the lobby was newly done. It was beautiful, but dead. And from a client standpoint, they were like, we have to redo this. From a sustainability standpoint, that's horrible. But we didn't really have a choice at that time. So what we started to do was, of course, we looked at the idea of bringing more productive furniture in. Of course, we looked at adding a level of F&B in. But I think for us, the big aha moment came when we realized that this was actually part of a larger mixed-use development where there was a lot of residential at the back as well. And so the question became, when we have these office buildings, and this happens a lot in our cities as well, is during the weekends they're dead. No one's really going into them. They're very, very underutilized. And so we had this conversation with the client about how do we give back the office space, or at least the ground plane, back to the community over the weekends. So things like pop-up retails, event spaces, F&B, community F&B. And so that also then gave us the ethos of how we wanted to design the space. It wasn't about trying to be an artificial reception with, with a certain level of luxury and stones all integrated in it only, but it was an extension of the ground plane. There was a very active ground plane on the outside. How do we bring that in so that it all feels like it's a community space that can be occupied by the community and they don't feel daunted or they don't feel like visitors when they come into the space? So that really gave us a lot of the interventions that we came up within this space. It got constructed. And it gave, the feedback that we got was this really started to energize the community as well. So it was really kind of heartening for us to see. So at the end of that kind of short 3 stories, what I'd essentially like to leave off with is that designing for and understanding the behavior that different people do, the rich tapestry of the lives that people have and what they do during the day has essentially taught us a lot. And if there was one thing that we've kind of taken away from it is we've stopped trying to pitch design to people and we've just started listening to them. So thank you so much for the opportunity.